What is up, guys? I am finally back. Sorry for the long wait for the next video, but I've been really busy and hadn't had a chance. We got a 2008 GMC Acadia. Pretty nice car, but one of the common problems with these cars is the transmission fails, sometimes prematurely or sometimes they last a while. It just depends. But if I'm not mistaken, the 2-3 wave spring will break and it'll cause it to have all kinds of problems along with the transmission computer. So at any rate, I'm not sure what happened to this one, but it doesn't move anywhere, reverse, forward, nothing. So we found a used transmission that is supposedly guaranteed good, and they gave us a 6-month warranty. So we will see what happens there. We also found a motor. This is a whole different project here, but we found a motor for our Subaru B9 Tribeca. I'll be doing a video on that one here shortly. But anyway, we're going to pull this transmission out today. And a lot of times they tell you, just like in my last video, that you have to drop it out the bottom. And that is an absolute nightmare if you don't have a lift. And as you can see in my shop, I don't have a lift. And the main reason I don't have a lift is because I work on big U-Hauls. And if I put a lift in here, I'm not going to have any room for working on the U-Hauls. So at any rate, so what we'll do with this, because I've done it before, is we'll pull this whole front end off. It's really simple. There's really nothing to it. And we'll pull the whole front end off, and we'll just pull the engine and transmission as an assembly. And it should be pretty simple. It's straightforward. There's really nothing to it. But I just thought I'd do a video on it and do a little step-by-step with you and see how this goes. All right, let's get started. Guys, first thing we're going to do is take this hood off. I already have it completely unbolted and loose because I tried doing the video and it kind of messed up on me. So, but all you do is there's 4 13mm bolts, 2 on each side. You just pop those off, and then you pop this thing off with take a little flathead and you pop this little clip out, and it just pops out of there, and you can leave it on the hood. And then we're going to get the hood out of the way. Our next step is there is 5 or 6 little plastic clips. You just take a little flathead or a pick and you pop the middle part out. Sometimes they can be annoying, but these weren't. It's just a little clip right here. This pushes in and locks it in, and you use the flathead to pry that up. And you want to put these somewhere because for some reason they disappear when I don't hide them. So I'm going to put them on a tray for now, and then I'm going to put them in one of my drawers in my toolbox so I don't lose them. So let me just pop these off real quick. Sometimes especially the ones on the wheel wells, because they got some like these on the wheel wells, they'll get dirt in them and they'll be really hard to get out. A lot of times you just break them to get them out. But not these. So there's all those. I'm going to set this right here because I think there might be some more, I'm not sure. And then you just pull this cover. And what I like to do with all the parts, obviously I didn't put the hood back here, but what I like to do on most cars is put some floor mats down, paper floor mats, and I just like to set my parts in here, nice and easy. If this were a super nice car, I probably wouldn't do this, but this car is a little bit dirty on the inside. Apparently the previous owner had kids, so I just like to put it back there. That way it's all in the car so you don't lose them. This video, I had a lot of just me pointing at stuff. You really couldn't see it, so I'm going to try to get down there and show you a little bit more in depth. So we're going to go ahead and take these bolts out, all these, because this little front cross member, whatever you want to call it, is going to come out. So we'll take, we won't take these loose because this is just a computer. We'll just unplug it. But we'll take these bolts loose, these bolts, these, and to get these headlights out and the front clip, it makes it easier, for me anyway, to take these 3 bolts out of the fender. That way it gives you a little wiggle room. And then we got some screws here, because this whole front bumper is going to come off. There's some Phillips heads, and I believe I saw one more clip. Yep. So we're going to get all them bolts off, and then we'll get this front end off. So let me grab my 10 millimeter. Most of the bolts on this car seem to be 10 millimeters. And I'm actually going to grab a drill, make it a little bit faster, because these bolts don't have a whole lot of torque to them. So I'm just going to pop these out. Like I said, you don't have to do the fender bolts if you don't want to, but it just gives you a little more play when you're trying to get all this off. So we're going to take these Phillips heads out now. Actually, I don't know why I got a Phillips head. Let me just get my bit for my drill. Make this as quick as possible. These out. There's, I think, 6 Phillips head screws on the front of this. And one more of them plastic clips. If I can remember what I did with my pick. Here it is. Get this plastic clip off. Also, we're going to get these 2 10 millimeter bolts off too. There's one that holds the AC line, and then the other one holds the other 2, excuse me, holds the washer, or the coolant reservoir. Just kind of slide those out of the way, and we can actually go ahead and put these bolts back where they belong. Alright, so now all that's loose, we'll wait on these 13 millimeters because this ain't coming out yet. So there is a 10 millimeter bolt. Let me show you here. 10 millimeter bolts. There's 2 more to get these headlights off on each side. So there's one, it's gonna be kind of hard to see it, right there. And then there's another one underneath. I'm not gonna be able to show you that one, but it's pretty straightforward. So to get to the one underneath, we're gonna have to get this wheel well off. There's some Phillips heads screws right here, and we'll just take these 3 or 4 off right here on each side, and then that'll get you room to be able to stick your hand in there and get those loose. It's pretty simple. It's just, if you have massive arms or big hands, you can't get your hands in there. It makes it a little hard, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to get those off right quick, and I will be right back. One thing I forgot too, guys, is you definitely want to take the battery loose. I have already disconnected the battery. It's just a basic battery. Take terminals off. It's under the passenger. I guess it's not under the passenger seat, but you want to slide this passenger seat all the way forward before you disconnect the battery, because it makes it much easier to get to this. But there's just a cover, sits on it, and you just disconnect the battery, and it's pretty simple, nothing to it. Definitely want to do that before you start removing an engine, because you don't want your power turned on while you're loosening grounds and everything like that. So there's that. I pointed at the wrong bolts the last time. The bolts I pointed at were over here, that one right there, but that is for the radiator mount. But if you can see in there, it's right beside it, right over that way. So since I'm taking this whole front bumper off anyway, I'm gonna just take it off first, because it makes getting the headlights off so much easier. So all you have to do, it's gonna be hard to see in this video probably, but I just turned the wheels for now. I'm gonna get this thing up in the air in a little bit, but there's no need to get it up in the air right now. So I'm gonna try to show you the bolts. It's probably gonna be about impossible. So there's a 7mm, I think is what it is. Right there, kind of where my finger is. And then there's another one down in there. There's two 7mm bolts. I think they're 7. They could be a little bit smaller. But you take those two off on each side. And then there's some other screws. Right. There's some Phillips head screws that are right underneath. It's kind of hard to see. I don't know if you can even see them there. But you just pop those off. And this bumper comes completely off. So I'm going to do that right quick. So all I had to do, I didn't have to take the second bolt out right here to get this bracket off. There's just one 7mm bolt. And then you just kind of pop this plastic off. And then there is, there's supposed to be 2 or 3 screws right here, but there ended up only being 1 or 2 on each side. I guess some of the clips are missing. Somebody may have messed with this before or whatever. But at any rate, so all I had to do was take those out, unplug the fog lights, and this thing is nasty. I'm going to clean this before I put it back on. But so I'm going to put the screws back in all the places so I don't lose them, and then we'll keep going. All right, guys, so now that that's off, we're going to pop these headlights off. And like I said, it makes it much easier to get to this bolt. This is the one that I was telling you couldn't see with the bumper on. So you get that one off, and then this one that's right up underneath here. There's 2 of them, one on this one and one on that one, of course. So we get those off, and then we're going to keep pressing on. So we're going to get these headlights off. Turn this thing down. I know you can barely see me anyway, but it's the attempt that counts. And a ratchet wrench makes things a lot easier. So get some if you don't have some. Sometimes you can find them at the parts store really cheap. There's that bolt there. And then this one, now that we got this loose and it's kind of out of the way, we can actually take this other bolt off. And this part will just pop right off and get out of our way so we can get to these other ones. And we're getting to the point where we're going to have to drain all the fluids. We'll go ahead and, I'm probably not going to drain the oil. I'm not going to be flipping the engine upside down or anything like that, or taking anything loose out of it. So I'm probably going to leave the engine oil alone, but I am going to drain the radiator. And when I pull the CV axles off, I will take and put some plugs. I showed them to you in the last video. Some plugs where the CV axles go to prevent the leaks. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's no drain pan. So here's this part of the front bumper assembly, I guess. And there was one sensor. I'm guessing this is some type of temperature sensor, or maybe, I don't think it's an airbag sensor or anything like that. But anyway, there's that. Let me set this to the side. Put this out of the way. And then get my drill back and 10mm and pop these other bolts off. Get these headlights out of our way. Oh, there's one more 10mm bolt. Forgot about it. I do a lot of cars, so can't remember everything. 2 more, my bad. So those bolts that I pointed at, those were for the that front bumper assembly part, and the other bolt for the headlight is a little bit in behind it. It is right there. So there's that. I'm gonna get this right eventually, guys. So we got that bolt, and then there was another one right here on the side. So we're gonna pop that bolt off. I'm hoping to be able to start putting a lot more videos on here. I hope y'all enjoy them. If you do, make sure and subscribe to my page and hit that, I think it's like a bell on the page, so you can get notified when I do get new videos, and we keep you up to date. Sometimes I don't have time to make videos on some cars because I gotta get them in and out in a hurry, but I'm gonna try to make time to do videos on some cars that have some common problems that if you have some hand tools and a decent amount of skill, you can get it done. Alright, now that we got these headlights out of the way, we're going to take these bolts out right quick, and we're going to go ahead and get the radiator support brackets off. And these bolts are 13 millimeters, and we're going to pop these off right quick. There's that. And I'm going to go ahead and take these connectors off. Go ahead and take these connectors off. These are just simple connectors. You push this little pin in and you pull this lever all the way back, and then you just wiggle the connector out. And I'm pretty sure they're all different, so I don't think you can mess up by putting one in the wrong spot. They usually make them dummy proof. That one's actually broken, and they're actually different colors, so that's what separates them, and they're different connectors. Yep. All right, there's those. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drain the coolant out of this car, and the AC has already been discharged, so I don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to drain the coolant out, and I'll be right back. Okay, so before I drain the coolant, I'm going to take these upper radiator mounts off, just two 10 millimeter bolts on each side. And we can go ahead and pull this overflow hose off the top. They don't have a drain plug on these radiators, which a lot of them, they don't come with them anymore anyway. But if they had one, you could just drain all the coolant out of that. It's the less messy version, but we'll get it out. We'll just disconnect the lower hose and let it all drain out, and hopefully not make too much of a mess. So get these mounts out of here and go put them around back. So that just gave me a little more room to get my hand down in here so I can get the lower hose off. It's just a screw type clamp. So let me set these down and get the coolant drained. I'll be right back. Guys, so I got the coolant draining. What we're going to do next is, since the AC is already discharged, we're going to take the lines off of the condenser. That's just a 10 millimeter bolt. That pops out of the way. And after that, we're going to get this condenser out of here. It just pops out of these little clips. And we're going to start disassembling. This whole piece will come off. There's 4 or 5 bolts, I think, down here that you take off. And this whole front end will come off and make it super easy to access all the rest of the engine. So let me get this situated here. Alright guys, so I managed to not make too big of a mess draining the coolant. Sometimes it can be difficult on these cars to not make a huge mess. Adjust this camera a little bit so it don't look like you're talking to a headless man. So we're going to go ahead and pop this connector, and just to make sure there isn't any left over, just want to kind of barely loosen those, and definitely completely empty. We vacuumed it out, so should be good. We'll just tuck those out of the way for now. Screw this condenser hose bolt back in so we don't lose it, and we'll go ahead and pop this out of the way. Actually, we can probably get away with just leaving it on there. So we'll just leave it on there actually. Leave those clips off. So looks like we've got just about all we can get out of the radiator. So we got some transmission cooling lines to get loose. Let me flip this camera around and I'll show you. There's transmission cooling lines right there. So they got the little, it's hard to see in this camera, but there's little metal clips. They're like a C-clip. You just get a little pick and just pop them out of there. Be careful when you pop them out of there because they will fly off and you'll never find them again. You'll have to go buy some more. They're not crazy hard to buy, but they can be difficult, and it's easier if you just don't lose them. Let me grab my pick and we'll get started getting this off. So just ease them off of there. I always like to put my hand under it, that way if it does fly, at least maybe it'll hit your hand if you're lucky. There's that one. See, looks just like this. Little C-clip. I think that's what they call it, or E-clip, whatever you want to call it. So just put those in this magnetic tray. Alright guys, had to pause, take a call from my beautiful wife. So let me get back to doing this. It's a little bit of a pain because you can barely get to it. And I'm thinking, let's go ahead and get this upper hose off. It's just a screw type clamp, like I said for the other one. And just loosen it and pop it off. There shouldn't be much coolant coming out of this hose. There might be a little bit of drippage. Always dispose of your fluids properly. Don't go pouring them out on your yard, especially antifreeze, because they've come a long way with antifreeze, but they haven't come that far. Dogs can still get a hold of it, and if any animals, dogs, cats, whatever you got, get a hold of it, it can kill them. So you don't want that. Probably a pretty painful way to go. So all I did was loosen that, and now I'm going to take this connector off for the coolant fans. And it is definitely stuck. I'm going to get my pick wherever I happen to put it. There it is. It's just a push type connector. You just push it in there. There we go. And that disconnects the coolant fans. And we can actually leave the coolant fans on now because I think I can get my hand down in there. Alright, I think I got lucky here. There's the other one. Just put those in there for now. Now that we got these cooling lines off, pull them out, and that one's got a little bit on it coming out, fluid. So now we got this radiator completely disconnected from everything, and we should just be able to pull this straight up. There we go. And we'll just lay it on its back so it doesn't drain anymore. It shouldn't anyway. I don't know if I said this in my video before, but I found that it's much easier, instead of putting your bolts in bags or anything like that, it's easier just to put them back in the holes they came from. It makes life a lot easier. That way you know where they're at and you know where they go. So now that we got this coolant drained, let me get this jug out of the way. Shouldn't have no more coming out of there right now. And we're going to start taking this whole front end off. Slide this hose through there because that'll just stay on its own. Oh, got a little coolant. Got to make a little mess somewhere. So We got all that loose. So now, let me turn this camera around. I'll show you these bolts again. All right, so you got these 2 bolts here, and there's 2 bolts in these holes, and then a little 10 millimeter, and 10 millimeter there. And this front bumper, if you leave these 2 on, this front bumper will come off first to make it a little bit lighter for you, because this thing's, it's not crazy heavy, but it's a little bit heavy. So let me get these bolts out and get this bumper off. And let's see what size these are. They look like 15s. So we'll grab 15 millimeter. I'll have to go get another socket because I ain't gonna get that one back until I get this off. So you always want to have extra sockets, especially 10 millimeters. That one's a little bit tight. They're all tight. I'm just going to grab the impact. Pop them off with ease. Milwaukee impact. Phenomenal. Worth its weight in gold. And in my personal opinion, I'm a snap-on guy, but I think this Milwaukee blows snap-on out of the water. Just my opinion. And the customer service at Milwaukee is phenomenal. Because I've had it break and they send you a brand new one or fix it with no issues. So, customer service is important when you're working on cars and you got time to deal with going back and forth to stores. You just send it off and they'll fix it and send it back to you. Get out of the abyss. There we go. There's the front bumper. I'll put this up and I'm going to be right back. Alright, let me lower my camera a little bit here. And so you see what I'm doing? This is pretty much completely loose, as you can see. There is one 10 millimeter bolt left on the bottom. But before we do that, we need to take this bracket off right here. So we're gonna get these 10 millimeter bolts off, but we want to make sure all these connectors are unplugged. So we got a, let me turn this camera around, I'll show you. Unplug anything that's hooked to this connector that's not gonna cooperate when you go to pull it off. So you get that washer pump, probably some kind of fluid sensor there. And then so the one, this is probably the fluid sensor. Those are probably the 2 pumps. This thing's probably got heated washer fluid or something. So there's that. And there's one wire going right here. It is a ground wire. So we'll take that off there. It's just a 10 millimeter. I know this seems like a lot, but some other mechanics may have their own opinions on this. But I have found this is much simpler. It may be a little bit of extra bolts, but like I said, without a lift, it's a nightmare to try to do all that down through the bottom. So we can leave the horn plugged in over here. Looks like we're good. Actually, what we'll do, we'll unplug the horn now that I think about it. Pull that little clip off, and horn's just a little squeeze. So we'll unhook that way it's just completely disconnected from there. I don't see any ground wire over here. So we're gonna take them 10 millimeter bolts off and get this thing out of here. So I'll get my ratchet here. You want to kind of put your hand on it and hold it up, because when you take these out, there's going to be nothing else holding it. So, it's just made of plastic. It's not extremely heavy. Oh, you know what? I forgot to take the hood latch off. So we'll do, actually, to get this out of the way, we're going to take the 10 millimeter bolts out to just get the hood latch out of the way. There's 3 of them. 10 millimeter nuts, I should say. We'll just slide that out of the way. And there's a sensor on the back of it. Lets you know if your hood is open or not. And there's a connector for it right here. So we'll just disconnect this connector and just let that kind of sit out of the way. Put these nuts back on. And then we'll get the 13 millimeter. I don't think I brought it out yet. You want to be careful that doesn't hit your head, because that kind of hurts. I have a pretty hard head, so I'll live. So put these bolts back, or nuts back on here. There's the bracket. There's those 2 nuts right here. Now that we got that out of the way, we got them bolts loose. This should just slide right out of the way. We got one more sensor. This is their airbag sensor. We're going to want to take that loose. It's got a little safety clip on it to keep it from disconnected. And then you just, it's just a squeeze type connector. Hard to explain those connectors. I don't know if you can see it or not, but the yellow, anytime you see a yellow connector, 90% of the time it's going to be an airbag connector. So look out for those. And there's actually a second one that you can just leave alone, it looks like. There's a connector. I can get this thing to look right enough. There's a connector here, and there's another ground wire right here. 10 millimeter bolt. Make it a little easier. So to get this wire harness off, so we got that connector loose. So we're going to want to take this junction box, relay box, whatever you want to call it, and go ahead and just pop it out of here, because it's going to need to get out of here anyway. So there's a 15 millimeter bolt right here. Excuse me, 13 millimeter bolt. And then there's some 10 millimeter bolts right there. When you pop those off and get this cable out of the way, this should just slide right up after you loosen these clips right here. You just kind of got to work it out of there. So there's like a bunch of clips around it. You just kind of pull them back. You might get a pick while you're pulling it out of there. And that should come right out of there. Pop that off. This is your main power. These cables, one goes to the alternator, one goes to the battery. Screw that back on there. And reach over here and grab my pick. Just kind of pry up on this, work it up. A little bit more. There we go. There's your junction box, relay box, whatever you want to call it, fuse box. So now that that is disconnected, a little bit more to do here. There's another connector right here. There's that. Let's go ahead and pop this engine cover off. There's one more harness and this thing should be free, hopefully. It's a little bit to it, but like I said, in the long run, it's worth it. So once you get this off, you're home free. So this cover just pops off. I'm gonna go set that back in the back, keep it out of the way. Okay, so this should separate right in there. There's a little clip right in that hole, and you pull it out, and these two should split. So you can take this off, and this whole thing will come off. So, just pop that cover off so it's out of the way. And there's the clip. There you go. We'll pop that cover back on there so we don't lose it. Because that'll just snap back together. So there's all that. This is loose. Oh, almost. I promise. It's just hung up. There. Alright. There's that. I'm going to set this out of the way. As you can see, like I said, this will come almost straight out of here. It's a little bit tight, but it's not bad at all once you get all this stuff out of the way. So now that we got all this out of here, we're going to pop this air box off. I got the mass airflow sensor, and we'll get these clamps unhooked, and this hose right here, we'll pop it off, get this air box out. There's a 10mm bolt right there, and I want to say there's one more underneath the cover of it. So we'll pop these little Torx bolts out, and then we'll work on getting this intake out. Let me grab my Torx bits. There's the air box. Push them bolts down in the hole so you don't lose them. There's the top of the air box. Air filter, not crazy dirty. Set those there for now. I'll go get them later. Well, from what it feels like, there's just that one 10mm bolt that I showed you. So we'll pop that off right quick. Just get this stuff out of the way. You could probably leave this on if you really wanted to, but I just figured the more out of the way, the better. Yeah, it's just got, okay, so it's got a 10mm bolt, and then it's got a little spot right here that pops in. There's a little nipple that sticks out of the transmission, I believe, or on the side of the frame, and it just pops in there. So there's that. All right, now we got all that exposed. We can go ahead and work on starting to take this intake off. So let me turn this camera around and I'll show you. Got a few sensors, some type of map sensor, I think, right there, or air sensor. And there's a hose right here you want to take off. There's a hose here. It's already been repaired. Nice little repair job there. And this wiring harness needs to get zip tied. Obviously this has been taken out before, so you'll want to cut those zip ties. And there is a sensor right here for the electric throttle, and looks like an emissions type sensor there, but I don't think it's connected to the intake, so we should be all right. Then you got your brake booster hose right here. You want to pop that off, and that should be it on all the connectors. And then it's gonna be hard to see down in them holes, but down in this hole there is 13mm bolts. You just stick you an extension, a 13mm bolt there and there, and then there's two more back here. These are kind of fun to get. These right here, you'll have to get a U-joint and try to get those off. And then you got this 13mm bolt right here, and think there's one more. There is, I don't think there's any more. So, but you'll want to take this, it's hard to see down in there, if I can find it. Right there, there's a 10mm bolt right in there, and that pulls this little sensor off. So we'll get all that done, get that intake off. Should almost be loose. We just gotta get these connectors off. Feels like there might be one more bolt though. Man, I got this one all the way loose. Alright, so let's get these connectors off now. It's just a little squeeze connector. We can probably just about pop those, but I'm gonna get the snip so we can put a zip tie back there when we get done. Zip ties aren't exactly factory, but something like this, just holding the wire in place, shouldn't be much of a problem, I wouldn't think. Better than just letting the wire dangle there. Got that. There's a connector back here, and it's got a little safety thing on it. You just slide back. There's that. Slide these out of the way. Okay, so there's a 10mm right here. Let me flip the camera around and I'll show you. There's a 10mm bolt right here. And then, like I said, there's another 10mm bolt down here. We'll get off and we'll get that hose off. And that should be about all the bolts for the intake. Okay, there's one more 13 back here in the corner, just like the 13 up here. Don't think we'll be, well, we probably can get a ratchet on that. Super long too. Alright, there's the intake. I'm going to set this and the air box in the back, and I'll be right back. So now that we got that out of the way, we're going to disconnect this AC line. It's a 13mm bolt right there. And we're going to get these coils disconnected. They just a squeeze type connector. Some of them still got the safety things that you pull back. And we're going to take shifter off. It's pretty straightforward. You can leave the cooler lines on. You can leave this hose on. But we will need to take the coolant hoses off for the heater core. They're just squeeze type. Oh, let me get you in there. I'll show you. They're squeeze connectors. You just squeeze them and push up and they'll come off. That may get a little messy, so we'll probably wait till the last bit for that too. And we'll just start getting all these wiring harnesses moved out of the way. And we should be able to leave just about everything on the front. I don't see why we got to take any of it off. So we'll just keep disassembling everything. Go ahead and get this AC line out of the way. Pop that off of there. Just set it over here for now. And then you got two 13mm bolts down here for the shifter cable. We'll just pop them off right quick. And then the other part of it just pops off of there. And you can just kind of set that to the side out of your way. Put these bolts back in. And this sensor should be fine. That goes right in there though. We'll put that up there so we don't put that back on. We will disconnect. Okay, so we're going to take this power steering line off. And we'll probably, you can't disconnect it down here, so we'll disconnect it up here. Alright, so pull this hose off. Alright, now that we got that drained, we can get this hose out of the way. It's got a little clamp. We're just gonna just pull that connector loose, and we'll set that down there. And we'll try to leave this up in the air so it doesn't leak everywhere. I don't know how well it'll work, but we'll give it a shot. Hose clamp back on. Alright. And I'm going to get this AC hose around this so when we go to pull it, it doesn't affect us. Okay, so there is that. We got all that disconnected, and we can leave that hose hooked up because that goes to the power steering pump. So now let's come over to this transmission. Tuck this back in here, it came off. Okay, so the transmission, let me turn this thing around. Okay, so the transmission has a, get this hose out of the way so we can see it. Has a connector just like the computer that was up here. You just push it and push this lever forward and that pops out. And we can leave all these connectors because these are going to stay on the car, on the engine. And let's see. I don't think there's another sensor on the transmission, except maybe in the back. There might be a sensor in the back. I can't recall. I don't see it right now. I think most of the solenoids and everything are right in the Techum, as they call it. So we'll get that off, and that should be all we got to do on the transmission. Then we'll get those coolant hoses off and everything else. So now we got all these wires disconnected. Get these out of the way. And we got 2 more connectors under here. It's just a matter of following the wire and harness to see where the connectors are and then disconnecting them. There's that. And there's one power steering line. Let me turn this camera around. Power steering line back on the, if I can see it on my camera, back on the rack that you have to take off. It runs to the pump. So it's a 10 millimeter bolt. It's not the one that's threaded in. It's just a 10 or 8 millimeter bolt, and you pop it out and then just leave it dangling right in there and put that bolt back in. Alright, so let me get my ratchet and get that power steering line off before I forget about it. Complicated. Before we do this though, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this fuel line. Let me get my disconnect kit. you'll need, you can get this whole kit if you want. Mine's missing a few pieces because I lost a few. But you just need probably this yellow one, maybe the red one though. I think it might be the red one. But you'll definitely need these to get this fuel line off. So there wasn't that much fuel to come out of there. But like I said, be careful, and fuel is very flammable, so you'll definitely want to be careful with that when you're going to hook that back up. Make sure it hooks back up right, and check for any fuel leaks, because it does go boom and it can kill you. Put this kit up. All right, now that I got that out of the way, I'm gonna get this line like I said. And there's actually two lines on this little connector here, but once you get this bolt loose, they'll separate from each other. And it's probably going to leak a little bit, but that's okay. We'll clean up our mess. And that bolt just stays on that bracket. So just pull those lines out once you get it loose. And they pretty much will separate on their own. And you can kind of see which line goes up to your engine. So just follow the line that goes behind the engine to the pump. And that's the one that's gonna come out with the engine. It's making a little bit of mess, but not too bad. That's the old transmission anyway, so it don't matter. So we're gonna get these coolant lines off. Like I said, you just squeeze, come right off, get them out of the way. Just tuck them out of the way so they're not bothering you. And all right, got all that loose. Wiring harnesses are separated. I can't think of anything else. Of course, while you're pulling out, sometimes you got to make some adjustments. So just adjust as necessary. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to get this thing up in the air and get the tires off. And we'll start disassembling the CV axles and dropping the exhaust. And actually, we're going to do one more thing. Actually, no, we should be fine. I was going to take this cat off, but I think we can live with leaving it on. We'll just drop the exhaust down there and pull this whole thing out of here. All right, let me get set up. All right, guys, so I got the car up in the air. Definitely practice safety when you get these things this high up in the air. I always like to jack them up, put safety stands under them, and let them down on the safety stands. And I always leave the jack on it too, just for a little extra safety. You can never be too careful. I got the tires off. Like I said in my previous video, if you don't know how to take a tire off, you probably shouldn't be trying to pull the motor and tranny. So now what we got to do is get the CV axles off. So what we'll do is we'll take these two bolts off to drop it from the strut, and that'll let it come down like this so we can get the CV axle off. We'll also have to take the calipers loose. They're just 13 millimeter bolts, I believe. And you just pop that off. That way you don't stretch this brake line. And you'll want to maybe get a zip tie or a hanger or something. And I always just hang them up here on the strut. And then you got the nut for the CV axle. You pop that loose, and that's where you definitely want to impact, because that's kind of hard to loosen without it. And then you just kind of tap that out with a hammer lightly, and it pops right out. I don't think we're gonna have to take the tie rod loose, but we may just do it. Yeah, we'll probably just do it anyway, just to be safe. That way we don't put no strain on anything right there. So that's just a, I believe it's like a 21 inch or 21 millimeter nut. And then to get a tie rod loose, you want to smack it with the hammer right there. You don't want to smack on the threads because that's how you break it. And you just smack it right here and knock the taper loose. It's got like a little taper seal, and once you knock that loose, it'll pop right out. And that should be it. Let's see. We'll probably, to be safe too, we'll probably take this loose. It's just a little clip. You stick your little flathead right there and pop that loose, just to give this speed sensor a little slack, because this is all going to drop down. And if it needs more slack, we may pop that off too. And so that's what we'll do on this side. Let me get the camera set up and we'll get started. All right, guys, so let me grab my sockets and we will get started. We'll go ahead with the CV axle nut, find the socket for it. See, impact comes right off. All right, go ahead and knock this tie rod off right quick. That is a 21 millimeter, and the nuts, they vary because if they've been changed, the nuts can be a different size. This one is about a 34, but like I said, it'll vary. It just depends on if it's ever been changed. And if you have to end up tapping on the threads, just be really careful. This one has some play to it because there's not threads at the very tip, so you should be all right as long as you hit that. And there, I already had it loose. So we'll just leave the nut right there. So now that the tie rod's off, we'll go ahead and get the caliper loose and secure it to the strut somehow. Now's a good time if you need brakes to go ahead and change them while you got all this off. Like I said, just lightly tap on this to get it loose. You don't want to hit that too hard because you can damage the threads. And these, like I said, they just pop loose. You just stick a flathead in the end that opens, and that should be enough slack. Actually, there's one more here. That'll be easy to get off with my little tool I showed you yesterday. It's one of those clips that just pops out. You just put it under there and clip it out. So that should be enough slack there, now that we got that out. So now we're going to take these upper control arm, I guess you could call it. It's not really a control arm, but it is at the same time. So this side, usually these got, they kind of press in, so you shouldn't have to hold this side. But if you do, that's 21, I believe. And then the other side is probably 7/8. At least. See what I'm saying? It's got some, like a little press fitting on it. So we'll put those nuts back on these bolts so we know where they go. And once we get this all apart, we'll probably just put this back together loosely, because we're gonna have to set this thing back down to get the engine out. So now that popped out, you got plenty of slack on this. Now you should be able to just push this out, and this may be where you could use the pry bar to help you get this out. Just be careful, don't stretch this too much because you don't want to break your CV axle. And you may have to tap on it with a hammer a little bit more. There we go. We're loose. Now that we got that loose, Let me go grab my special tool. Like I showed in the last video, I do believe, these things are great. They're not that expensive. And what you do when you pop the CV axle off, you find the right size and pop this in, and it stops a massive leak from happening. Because I did not drain this transmission yet. I think they might be that size, but I'm not sure. You'll need 2 sets of these though if you're going to do it, because they only come in one size in each set. It just saves you from making a big mess. So I'm going to get a drain pan first, just in case something's going to leak out, which it'll definitely leak out before I get that plug in there. And those kind of things you don't have to have to do it. It just saves you from making a big mess. So all you do is you get behind the CV axle where it plugs into the transmission. It's got like a little C-clip that locks it in, so you just pry out. Sometimes they're easy, sometimes they're difficult. It just depends. Just get you a pry bar back in there and go to town. That one was super easy, so there's some transmission fluid coming out. We'll go ahead and let a little bit of that drain. If you can see, there's a little C-clip right there. That's what holds it in place when you put it in. So we're just going to set this out here. I don't want that transmission fluid getting all over the back of this car. So we'll let that drain a little bit, and then we'll put my plug in there, and I'm going to get set up for the other side. Alright guys, so this side is pretty much exactly the same as the other side. So just pop the CV axle nut off. Let me grab it. So these are the tools I'm talking about. You just kind of get them up in there behind the CV axle. It gives you a little room to pry, or if you need to tap a little bit, just tap right there. 2 different kinds. Now that I thought about it, it's got a another long shaft that goes to the transmission. So this side's definitely not going to leak. So we're good to go. Let me set this to the side and we'll carry on. Right, so now that we got the CV axles off, the next step is to get these motor mounts loose while we're right here. There's one right here. Just take that nut off. It's looks like about a 15, and you may or may not have to take the other one off to get it separated. I think we might be able to get it up high enough to where we don't have to take it, but if you do have to take it off, there's a nut underneath right here. I think it's about a 15 too. So you just pop that off. And then on the other side, when we get to it, is this mount here. Now, to get some space, if I remember right, you will have to get this mount out of the way to give you some wiggle room to get this thing out of here. And plus you have to take this bracket loose. So to get this mount off, you take this nut off. This nut down here, it's 15 millimeter. And then there's some 18 millimeter bolts right here. There's one, I think there's 3. I think there's 1, 2, and then you have to get this mount off to get this 3rd bolt. So there's 3 18 millimeter bolts that we'll get off there. And then once we're done there, we'll slide under the car and do the exhaust. Now we're on this other side. We're going to get this mount off. And then we're probably going to have to put a jack underneath the transmission here and jack it up so we can get this mount off of here. It can be a little tricky, but it's not too bad. I got the jack set up and I went and got my 18 millimeter ratchet. So we're going to go ahead and pop off some bolts go. Whew. And then let's get this last bolt out. We'll drop this so we can get to it. There's that bolt, and keep in mind that the 2 bolts on this side were shorter and the other bolt is a little bit longer. I think it rolled off. I'm not sure where it went, but I'll find it at any rate. Just bear in mind that you put the long one in this short one, it'll bottom out before it tightens anyway, so you'll be able to see it. Now I'm going to jack this thing back up so this bracket will come up here. The transmission mount bracket. We're going to slide under here, and so all we have to do now is take the drive shaft off, which is right here. It's like either 8 or 10 millimeter bolts. I think it's 8. There's about 6 of them. You pop those off and then probably just get a pry bar in there, and this will just pop out and you can just kind of leave it hanging. And then in the exhaust manifold that has been rigged up with some new bolts, probably because the old ones broke. So looks like it'll work all right though. So you get those off. These look like 14s, I think, maybe 13s. On the normal one, I think they're 13s if they're the original ones. And we'll drop this pipe out of the way. And we should be okay with leaving that oxygen sensor connected, because I don't think it's part of that wire. Well, yeah, it is. So we'll disconnect that oxygen sensor. Then we'll come up here. There's a bracket right here. It's like a 12 maybe, and a 14 it's been rigged up to. And then we'll drop it right here. Disconnect this oxygen sensor so it doesn't rip the wires, and then this exhaust will just kind of sit down here, and I think that is all we got to do down here. And I'm going to try to set the camera up underneath here. I don't know how well it's going to work, but I'm going to give it a shot. I don't know how much y'all will see, but at least I can say I tried. So let me get that set up and I'll be right back. Guys, sorry if you can't hear me as well. I'm not sure how good the audio is going to be. My microphone's got a little glitch going on right now. So, but anyway, I don't have a fan on or anything, so you should be able to hear me fine. So I got the car down. We pretty much got everything disconnected up here. All we got to do is take the this upper motor mount off right here, and we'll loosen this lower one. I believe that's either a 15 or maybe an 18. And this is a 15. So you just pop that out, and then we'll hook a strap to this and we'll get this thing pulled out of here. All right, so let me grab my tools and we will get this taken out of here right quick. I believe we'll use 15s, and we'll just use the impact to get them off. Yep, 15s. Grab my impact here. Pop this thing off in here. When we get the motor pulled, we'll put this nut back on there so we don't forget what it went. That's a bolt right there, 15mm bolt. Just two there. And this motor is loose. So now all we got to do is hook a strap up to it and lift it up out of here. I don't know if we're going to be able to get high enough up. I may end up taking this catalytic converter off, but we'll see. I'll adjust as necessary. But I am going to go grab a quick bite to eat, and I will be right back. Guys, so back from lunch, I went ahead and got this strap hooked up here for the engine hoist. What I did, let me turn this camera around and I will show you. So what I did is I just, a lot of times if you have hook points, it's good to use a chain, but I've used seat belts before. It's a very strong material, and I've had no problems with it before. So all you do is you wrap the strap. I just wrapped it around the motor mount. There's really no good hook points. And then I got a little fabricated bracket that I bolted into this hole, put a hook and tied it to that side. So we should be good there. And I think what we may have to do is get this bracket right here off, because this thing needs to come up some before I can slide it out, and that bracket's not going to allow me to do it. So I'm probably going to have to take that loose right quick, which means I'm going to have to pop this relay, the bottom of this relay box off. It's just got some 10mm bolts, one there, one in this little spot here, and I believe it just pops out of there. Oh, one more right there. So we'll get all that off, and then we'll get this thing out of here. So let me get my 10mm. We'll make this happen. Sometimes they can be a little bit of a pain, like I said before. Nothing we can handle up. Get that out of the way for now. And we'll pop this other bolt out. This bracket will be out of our way. To the side here. I'm going to put these bolts back in here so don't lose them. Take this, dangle it down here. Now we got another 15mm, looks like. Let's bracket it off. And that is out of our way. So let me get this engine hoist set up and we'll get this thing out of here. So I got the hoist set up. Now we're just going to slowly lift this thing up out of here. Alright, so I think I got this strapped on. I had to go around the back of the exhaust. And I ended up using a piece of the chain. Sometimes you just got to use whatever works. So, this is the work though. Just getting that exhaust over the little hump, which we just about got. Once we get over that hump, we'll be home free. There we go. power steering coolant. And we're gonna plug that hole because we're losing a lot of coolant there. Try not to make a mess. Stuff a rag in there for now. Should hold it for a second while I get it up out of here. Yeah, there's a power steering cooler down there. You want to try to be careful with if you can. And there she is. So like I said, guys, there's nothing that's like complicated that you can't do without some basic hand tools. You just need a good engine hoist and jacks and some pry bars, hand tools, just basic stuff. And it comes right up out of there. I find that much easier. You can drop it down from the bottom too if you can get it up high enough, it can come out. But I just think this is just as easy, if not easier. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clean up a little bit, pick some tools up, and then I'm going to get everything set up, and we will start working on disassembling the transmission from this engine and getting this new one mounted up to it. So I will be right back. Guys, so I pushed the car out, got everything cleaned up here, and I went ahead and got some degreaser on the car and kind of clean that off a little bit. Just if you do that, try not to get anything on the connectors, and if you do, just make sure you get some air, blow them out, let them dry out real good. You don't want anything shorting out. So I got this sitting here draining. It's just about as much as it's going to come out of that side. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to get this transfer case off. It's for the all-wheel drive. It's got three, I'm pretty sure these are 18, or it's got 4 18mm bolts right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I think there's a couple more on the other side. Yeah, you got 2 more right there. And then you got a bracket right here that's going to get in our way. So we'll have to take that off too. Looks like another 18, 13 maybe. 15. It's like either some 15s or maybe an 18 with it too. And then there's 3 bolts right in there. They are 13mm if I'm not mistaken. Then you take this whole bracket off. We'll probably do this bracket first so we don't fight it, because once you take those loose, this is going to swing around. So we'll take this loose, and then we'll take those bolts off. And then we'll get this transfer case off, and it's probably going to really start pouring when I take this transfer case off. So we'll try to catch as much as we can. All right, let me get the camera set up. All right, guys, got my tools. Let's go ahead and get this bracket off like I talked about first. Alright, there's that bracket right there. Like I said, there's 3 bolts right here and then 4 bolts there. So let's put these bolts back in their holes so we remember where they went. Alright, now that we got that off, we're going to get those transfer case bolts. The ones I was talking about there. Those are 18s. And the 4th one is for the transmission. There's that. This shouldn't fall directly out because it's splined into a shaft. But it's probably going to start leaking at some point. Alright, that looks like all the bolts. So just grab this thing, what you do is you just twist it. It's a little heavy, so if you need to get some help, by all means, get some help. There's the transfer case. Set it to the side. It is good, I do believe, so we're not going to worry about replacing that. We're just replacing the transmission itself. So, next thing we're going to do is we're going to spin this thing around and get the torque converter bolts off. And that's where we're going to have to take this catalytic converter off, because we're going to have to pop the starter off to get to the torque converter bolts. And let's see what we got going on here. Yeah, that's about the only way. Sometimes they put a payout cover where you can get to it, but it looks like it's through the starter. So let me turn this camera around, I'll show you. All right, guys, so what we'll have to do is take this catalytic converter off. The bolts are underneath here. This is just a little cover. It's got, well, it had 3 10mm bolts, but that one is broken. So you take this little cover off, and then there's some bolts underneath there. I'll show you when I get it undone. And you take those bolts off. This cat will drop down. There's actually a bracket right there, too. One of the transmission bolts. It's 15 or 18 maybe. And you get that cat out of the way, and then we'll pop the starter off. All right, guys, so like I said, we're going to take this cover off, the heat shield. It's supposed to have 3 10mm bolts, but it only has 2. That's okay. Extension out here so I can get to that second bolt. Once that cover's loose, you just slide this off of there. Slide the oxygen sensor connector through it. Then there's that cover. Just stick these bolts back in these holes so we don't lose it. Now, all right, so now we need to take these 3 nuts off. They are 15mm. And then we also have the nut down here that I was showing you. That's a 15mm too as well. So let me get the socket for that and we'll get that off. Get these off right quick. It also has, try not to lose this, has a sealing ring for the exhaust. I'm just going to screw these nuts back on here. Set this to the side for now. Now we're going to get the starter. We're just going to loosen it. I'm pretty sure we can leave the wires on. So you got this bolt and this bolt right here. It's like 2/15s. And then that'll slide off and that'll give us room to get the torque converter bolts out. Alright, so let's get my 15mm socket here. And we will take these off. These 2 bolts in this magnetic tray over here, and pull the starter off. There's actually a little sensor right. It's kind of hard to see, but it's like a knock sensor. It's got 13mm bolts in it. We'll pop that out so it give us a little clearance to get that out, so we don't have to disconnect your wire. Set this bolt over here. Okay, so now that's out of the way. I'm thinking it's going to give us enough clearance. Let's see. There we go. So we're just going to set the starter to the side. This is what I was talking about, the knock sensor. It just has a bolt that goes through it. So now, let me flip this camera around. So now There's your torque converter bolts. One's right. It's kind of hard to see on the camera. Right there. And there's 3 or 4 of those. And I'm pretty sure they are 18s. So what we'll do is we'll have to get a socket to fit the crankshaft right here. And we'll turn the crankshaft to get to the bolt, and then we'll hold the crankshaft while we're breaking that bolt loose. Hopefully that won't be too difficult. I'm gonna record this, but I don't know how much of it y'all are gonna be able to see, but you kind of get the gist of what I'm doing. That's the last one. Spin it around, make sure. And we are free now. Now all that's left to do is take the transmission bolts out and slide this thing up out of here. What we're gonna do is there's some 18mm bolts. This one actually might be 15. They're 18 on the other side. So you got 15mm bolts. You got a couple down here at the bottom of the engine. Then you got some around the back over here. And then you come over here. And there is one 18mm bolt, that one we were talking about for the transfer case. And then you got a 15 here. And then there's, like I said, there's a couple around the back. And then this thing should come loose. I'm going to get them loose first, and then I'll probably leave 1 or 2 in and set this on the ground and then loosen the rest, because you don't want the transmission falling down while you're loosening the bolts. It's another one of these points where 100% sure how much y'all are going to be able to see, but I got the camera rolling anyway. If y'all have any questions or comments or anything you want to leave, just feel free to ask me any questions on the comment section below. Once again, don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my page and hit the notification button, because I'm going to be having some videos coming up here. I'm going to try to start posting some more of them. So stay tuned. The best way to stay tuned is to subscribe to my page. So I'm getting the 15mm bolts that are on this side of the transmission right quick. That bolt there. Now I'm going to set it on the ground so it will be safe to remove those last 2 bolts. We may or may not start leaking coolant, not quite sure. Alright, that's good right there. Let me put these bolts up so I don't lose them. We'll get these last 15s out. This thing will be separated. Move the camera a little bit. Maybe y'all can get a better view. Alright. Got a 15mm right here. And 1 more right above it. Break that one loose, probably. Keep it with the electric ratchet. vacuum went a little too far. So let me reverse my ratchet here. Go in a little bit. More bolt, and we will have this in a second. Alright, there's that, and if I got every bolt loose, and I'm pretty sure it did, I should slide it off. And there we go. Let me separate this right quick. I'll be right back. Alright guys, so I got the transmission separated. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to post part 2 of putting the transmission back on the engine, the other transmission that we got, the known good one. And we'll put it back together, and then we'll drop it back in the car. Now's a good time when you got everything apart is to clean and check anything that you might need to replace while the engine's sitting out, such as maybe your spark plugs in the back that have to be on the intake, and that you have to remove the intake from to get to. Let me switch this around right quick. But now's a good time to change these spark plugs right here, because you have to take the intake off to get to those. So if you haven't tuned your car up, probably a good time to do that. And just check if you see any leaks. You know, valve covers can leak. You might want to replace those if they're leaking. These usually don't have rear main leaks, but if you want to check the rear main, if it's leaking, good time to change that, the rear main seal. And of course, we're replacing this whole transmission, and we won't have to do nothing with it. We'll just swap some bolts over and the cooler lines, and that should be good. Like I said, might want to get some new torque converter bolts. We'll see. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. And I will have part 2 out very soon. And go check it out. Make sure and like my video, subscribe to my page, please, and hit that little bell at the bottom to let you know when I'm posting new videos. And like I said, if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, just leave them below in the comment section, and I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. I'm usually on my phone a lot, so I will check them out. And y'all stay safe. Try not to get this coronavirus that's coming around. Wash your hands. Don't be stupid. And thank you for watching my video. Have a blessed day.